Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Luffy masters Dark Haki and become Dark King? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support the RyuUchihaSenju for writing that awesome fanfic and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. Let's start this video. Stupid forest. Stupid Jai-chan. This was mumbled by a little boy who was currently in the middle of a forest. The boy was standing at a height of 3'3", had shaggy black hair, black eyes, and was wearing a regular white t-shirt, blue shorts, and some pair of sandals. This boy was 5-year-old Monkey D. Luffy. Luffy scowled to himself as he thought back to what happened a few minutes ago. Flashback: Luffy was seen being held by the back of his collar as he was carried by an old but tough-looking man. The man was a tall, tanned, broad-chested, muscular old man who has a beard that was black, but his hair had some gray hair on the sides of his head. He had black eyes like Luffy and was wearing a pair of brown sandals, a red tropical shirt with yellow flowers, and white-colored shorts. This man was Monkey D. Garp, grandfather of Luffy and a Marine Vice Admiral known as Garp the Fist or Garp the Hero. Luffy struggled, trying to get out of his grandfather's grasp, but eventually gave up and just settled for glaring up at Garp. "Where the hell are you taking me, you old fart?" Garp gained a tick mark on his forehead and smacked Luffy on the top of his skull with his right fist. Wham! "Tai. Is that how you should be talking to your loving grandfather?" Luffy, with a smoking bump on his head, just stared at Garp with an angry confusion expression on his face. "How is hitting me, love?" Garp gained another tick mark on his forehead. Wham! "Tai. Don't talk back to me. Then stop hitting me." Wham! A couple arguments later, Luffy was seen with several bumps on his head as he dangled from Garp's grasp, and Garp was grinning in satisfaction with a smoking right fist. "That's more like it." After a while, Luffy stared up at Garp and asked the same question, only this time, he asked politely. "Where are you taking me, Jai-chan?" Garp glanced down at Luffy before he looking back up to watch where he was going. "I'm going to take you to a forest and leave you there for a month." Luffy's eyes widened and he asked, "Why?" Garp's grin grew wider and he said, "To make you into a strong marine like me, of course." Luffy instantly scowled and crossed his arms, looking to the side. "I don't want to be a stupid marine." Garp went from happy to angry in a second and scowled before he hit Luffy in the head with his right fist again, yelling, "Is that another way of calling me stupid? Take another of my fist of love." Luffy didn't really mean to indirectly insult his grandfather and was about to explain to him, but he knew that arguing with his grandfather was pointless, so he decided that saying nothing was the best bet. Hearing no more complaints from Luffy, Garp nodded, thinking that he finally got Luffy to stop disrespecting him. They reached the forest after walking a couple of minutes, and Garp dropped Luffy to the ground, causing said boy to hit the ground face first. He then turned around and started to walk away, waving his right hand. "I'll be back in a month, Luffy. You better be stronger when I come pick you up, or else you'll be tasting a lot more of my fists of love again." Luffy got up from the ground, rubbing his sore face and stuck out his tongue at Garp's back before getting up and walking away. Flashback end: Luffy's stomach grumbled, causing him to place his left hand over it. "Guess I got to find some food." Luffy nodded his head and stared to venture into the forest, hoping to find some food. 6 days later, Luffy was panting with his hands on his knees, but had a triumphant grin on his face as he looked at the prize he's been working so hard to get. A knocked-out boar. During the first 2 days Luffy spent in the forest, he was able to find a good spot to rest and was able to find some fruits like oranges and apples to satisfy his hunger for a bit until he started to get hungry about an hour later. Due to this, Luffy decided to go fishing and made a fishing rod out of the materials provided by the forest, which his grandfather taught him how to do whenever they went camping. He was able to catch enough fish to satisfy his belly like he wanted for the 3rd day, but for Luffy, it still wasn't enough because it couldn't match up to his favorite food. Meat. Anything that was made out of meat, besides human of course, Luffy would eat and instantly love it. No matter what type of meat, or even if it wasn't even cooked fully, Luffy would eat it with a grin on his face, proclaiming for more meat. So for the 4th day, Luffy, not surprisingly, started to look for an animal to eat. He eventually found some boars roaming around an area that was pretty close to his campsite and tried to fight them on his own, with no plan whatsoever or weapon. The result was to be expected, and Luffy was instantly running away from some angry boars with a bunch of bruises on his body. That night, Luffy's dinner was fruit and fish again, which made him full, but he wasn't satisfied as he pouted at not being able to get some meat. Luffy started to finally start thinking straight around the 5th day and made a plan to capture a boar. Pretty much his plan was to make a bat or some kind of weapon out of wood and knock out the boar. It wasn't really that different from his previous attempt, but at least he had a weapon. The second attempt, or course, ended in a failure, but Luffy was grinning as he got back to his campsite because he was able to damage the boars to some extent. He wasn't even mad about not having meat for dinner because he was finally getting somewhere. Finally, on the 6th day, Luffy came up with a better strategy than his previous attempts. When he approached the boars, Luffy started taunting them instead of attacking them, causing them to get angry and charge him. This time, as Luffy ran away, he maneuvered around trees to confuse them and slowly started to separate them by taunting them when the other boars weren't looking. His plan worked and he was face to face with one boar. With a makeshift bat in his hands made out of wood, Luffy ran at the boar and jumped up, smacking it in between the eyes. The boar shrieked in pain as it stepped back, but then shook its head before glaring at Luffy. Luffy wasn't deterred that the boar wasn't knocked out and just stuck his tongue out at it and pulled down his left eyelid with his left hand. The taunt worked in Luffy's favor as the boar charged at Luffy, not seeing the tree behind him, and when Luffy jumped up, knocked itself out. Luffy felt so exhausted, but his grin increased as he took a deep breath and yelled in the top of his lungs while throwing his arms in the sky. Yada. That night would be the night that Luffy finally had meat for dinner in such a long time well for him and couldn't be any happier. 24 days later, day of Garp's arrival. Luffy stood in the same place that Garp left him with his arms crossed, some bruises and cuts, and a huge grin on his face. The difference, though, from when he first arrived and now was how well built he looked now. Where he used to previously look like a scrawny kid with no meat in his bones, Luffy now had a slightly muscular yet lean body, which was extremely abnormal for a 5-year-old, but considering his family tree, it's really not that surprising. The days after his successful capture of the boar were incredibly easy for Luffy. As the days passed, he started to get stronger and faster at an exponential rate that he would be able to take on 3 boars at once, then 6 boars at once, and this pattern continued on until he was able to take on a horde of boars on his own. Luffy, after being bored of fighting boars, started to fight bigger animals like bears and tigers until he was able to fight them with barely any bruises or cuts on his body. This explained why his body, which used to be very scrawny looking, was a lot more muscular looking, just like his grandfather was when he was a kid, if all the stories he says is true about his childhood, which probably is considering how much of a monster he was now. Luffy suddenly frowned as he remembered encountering an animal that was 10 times stronger than any of the animals he's faced in the forest. FLASHBACK 1 week before the day of Garp's arrival. Man, I can't wait to go back and cook this bear. Luffy licked his lips in anticipation as he carried a bear 2 times his size over his head, easily, and was walking in the night to his campsite. He suddenly froze when he felt an incredible dose of killer intent from the forest. Luffy shivered and quickly dropped the corpse of the bear to the floor, jumping back into a fighting stance. He stared deep in the darkness of the forest until he saw glowing red eyes appear, which made him gulp, but he narrowed his eyes in determination. When the creature with the red eyes stepped out, Luffy was wide-eyed and was sweating. The creature was shown to be a crimson-red lion that was easily 10 times his size and was currently glaring down at Luffy and the corpse of the bear before it let out a roar. Raya. Luffy, knowing that he had no hopes of winning, immediately dropped his fighting stance and ran away. When the lion started to eat the corpse of the bear, Luffy ran as fast as he could away from the beast, but he knew that it wouldn't be enough. True to his words, the lion was already done eating and already caught up to him within seconds, due to its size. This just made Luffy run even faster, despite the pain of his legs telling him to stop, and eventually reached a dead end. Turning around, Luffy gulped and stared in the lion's eyes with fear. I am so dead. There's no way I could beat this thing. Luffy dropped his head down and clenched his fists, preparing to die. The lion roared and lifted its left paw, ready to end Luffy's life, when Luffy suddenly brought his head up and glared at the lion, with a fire burning in his eyes so bright that the lion actually froze for a second when it felt a wave of immense power wash over him. I will not die. I will live and beat this thing, even if it's the last thing I do. The lion shook its head and swiped its paw at Luffy, sending him flying into a boulder, instantly killing him as his body exploded in a shower of blood and gore. Luffy blinked, not knowing what he saw, until he noticed the lion shake its head similar to the vision he just witnessed and immediately jumped in the air, dodging the paw that passed under him harmlessly. While in the air, Luffy noted that the lion's expression would be described as astonishment and disbelief, not expecting him to be able to dodge his attack like that. He couldn't blame him because he was also in awe and disbelief that he was able to dodge that attack as well. Once his feet touched the ground, Luffy saw another vision. The lion, quickly getting over the fact that Luffy dodged his attack, got angry and slammed its right paw over Luffy, destroying his body in an instant, painting the floor where he was red with his blood. Luffy, knowing that he somehow was able to see what was going to happen, pushed his feet against the ground and dodged forward, making the lion's paw miss him, causing him to be directly under the lion's belly. He didn't know why, but he felt a sudden rush of power burst from within him, so he used that power and concentrated it into his right fist. He decided to wonder about why his hand turned black later and just threw the punch, directly in the middle of the lion's stomach. The effect was amazing and unbelievable to Luffy. As the punch came in contact with the lion's stomach, a ripple burst from where he punched that traveled throughout the lion's whole body, and the sound of a shockwave occurred as the lion was sent flying, destroying several trees and boulders in the process. Luffy just stood in the same place with his right arm still out, wide eyes, and an open jaw. When he snapped out of his dumbfounded state, Luffy followed where the lion flew and found it at least 2 miles away deep inside a boulder, dead with his fist print embedded into its stomach. After realizing that he wasn't in any more danger and that he defeated the lion, Luffy was grinning from ear to ear, jumping around in joy, yelling out things like "Hell yeah!" or "I'm awesome." That didn't last long, though, because the adrenaline rush, which he received from experiencing such a terrifying event, vanished from his system along with him using more energy than he was used to, caused him to felt overwhelming exhaustion, and he passed out right there. Flashback end. The day after facing the lion, Luffy woke up early in the morning and wondered what happened until he recalled everything about the previous night and how he used some kind of energy to predict the opponent's moves and to enhance the power of his attacks. He spent the rest of the week trying to bring out that energy again as he went hunting, which ended up being a success, but he was still having some trouble. Luffy was able to predict his opponent's attacks about 20% of the time and could cover his hands the same black color from the fight with the lion, but most of the time he would fight, it would always shut off after a couple minutes of fighting. Even though he only mastered this much, Luffy still is 5 years old, so for a boy his age to at least know this much would impress most people that were at least Grand Line level. Thanks to this, Luffy was prepared to use his newfound power against his grandfather until he started to think about what would happen if he did, and he paled. He was 100% sure that if he showed his grandfather this power, Garp would, without a doubt, beat him harder than before, which could ultimately lead to his death. Not wanting to die after already experiencing a life and death situation a week ago, Luffy stuck to just fighting with his strength and speed he acquired from fighting the many animals in the forest. Luffy lost his frown and stood straighter when he heard footsteps approaching. After a couple of seconds, Garp was seen standing in front of Luffy, wearing sandals, black pants, and a red Hawaiian shirt. Garp narrowed his eyes looking at Luffy up and down, making said boy nervous, until he grinned and nodded. "It seems you've gotten stronger so you won't have to experience my fists of love." Luffy relaxed and placed his left hand over his chest, sighing in relief. Seeing this, Garp's grin turned more sinister. "Well, if you are able to dodge it, that is." Luffy immediately lost his relieved look and turned pale, staring up at his grandfather in horror. That horror increased when he saw Garp's eyes glow as he cracked his right knuckles with his left hand. "Boom, you could have killed me, you old fart. Quit your whining, you ungrateful little brat. Boom, ah. Ha 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 ha." Luffy was really glad that he didn't show Garp his power, or else he might have actually had it worse than this. I don't even want to know what could be worse than this. 2 years later, after Luffy was done being beaten by Garp, where he was only hit 5 times, which was impressive since Garp at least sent out 30 punches, Garp dropped him off back to his hometown, Fuchsia Village, where he was taking care of Makino, and told Luffy that he would stop by from time to train him, making said boy scared to death. He was right to be scared because the times that Garp visited in the past 2 years, Garp would leave Luffy in insane conditions, telling him that it was to get him stronger. Seriously, what kind of grandfather sends their grandchild flying with balloons into a dark pit full of wolves and a dark creepy forest by themselves? Despite these unorthodox methods of training, Luffy did in fact get stronger because of it, except for that balloon one because Luffy truly believed that was just Garp enjoying torturing him. Anyways, Luffy was able to get stronger and faster from these experiences where he can now take on a large group of bears by himself and easily deal with them in a couple of minutes, but you can't expect anything less from the grandson of Garp the hero. Also, Luffy, when Garp wasn't at Fuchsia Village torturing the crap out of him, was able to work on his observation Haki and armament Haki. He actually learned what the power he unlocked was called because Luffy just straight up asked Garp if everyone had a mystery power, as he called it at the time, within them. Garp, being someone who couldn't even keep any secret and enjoyed saying anything he wanted, explained to Luffy what Haki was and how there was 3 types of Haki, which was armament, observation, and conqueror's Haki. Luffy didn't know if he had the Conqueror's Haki, but it didn't bother him that much because of how far he's got with his observation Haki and armament Haki. His observation Haki's level increased and his ability to predict his opponent was around 90%. He also started to be able to sense the presences of living things, and currently he could sense everyone from Fuchsia Village up to the creatures and people in Mount Kalubo. His armament Haki's level, Luffy would say, didn't increase as much as his observation Haki, but it was at a level he was satisfied with. Luffy could now cover his legs and arms at the same time now along with any weapon in his hands, but if he wanted to cover his head or chest, he would have to dissolve it from his hands and legs. He also learned that it could be used as a defense to make most attacks useless, unless the other person was using Haki as well or a devil fruit power. Overall, Luffy was already at Grand Line level, but Luffy had a problem during the 1 year of his training. That problem was what he going to do with his future because he didn't want to be like his grandfather. The solution actually came to him when pirate crew called the red-haired pirates made Fuchsia Village their base after 1 year of his training. Luffy met with the captain, Shanks, and his crew, where he instantly became friends with them and was awed by their stories of their adventures that they went through, inspiring him to be a pirate. When he told them that he was going to be a pirate, they laughed, angering him, and this just fueled him to train even more. After 2 years, Luffy was ready to show them how strong he was, but then he recalled how most of the crew, including Shanks, all had scars from their adventures, making Luffy believe that having a scar shows true strength. Sensing Shanks and his crew, Luffy quickly runs to meet them with an insane and stupid idea in his head. What Luffy didn't know was his ultimate dream would soon be realized. Fuchsia Village, in the small and peaceful village, within a bar that was known as Party's Bar, joy-filled laughter could be heard as several men enjoyed eating meat and partying like crazy. One big rounded man, wearing a white and green striped shirt and bandana and some pair of sunglasses, held a big barrel of sake up to the air. The man known as Lucky Roo let out a loud chuckle and yelled out, "A toast to Luffy's courage and our great voyage." The other men in the bar yelled out cheers and started drinking an incredible amount of sake. Said boy was seen sitting on a stool, staring down at the counter of the bar with some tears in his eyes, but a big grin on his face. It didn't hurt at all. The man sitting next to him scoffed and said, "Liar. How could you do something so stupid and reckless?" The man in question was a muscular man, but more like a runner's body, lean. He had dark red hair and 3 scars over his left eye. He was wearing a half-buttoned-up white dress shirt, brown shorts, a pair of sandals, and a straw hat with a red band. This was red-haired Shanks, a previous member of the Pirate King's crew and a Yonko in the New World. Luffy just continued to grin and stare up at Shanks. "I just wanted to show you that I'm not afraid of getting hurt, so why don't you take me with you on your next trip? I want to be a pirate like you." Shanks gained a huge smile and turned to Luffy, staring at him mockingly. "There's no way you could be a pirate. You can't even swim." Even though Shanks said those words, he was actually impressed by how much Luffy has grown and knew that he could take care of himself. Luffy was taller than the average 7-year-old, being 4'3", and had the same build he had 2 years ago, muscular yet lean, but you could see that he was a lot more muscular than before. He was wearing a white shirt with a word and symbol of an anchor on it, blue shorts, and a pair of sandals. His hair got slightly longer than before, and he had a bandage right under his left eye after the stunt he pulled just a few minutes ago. Luffy got angry and scowled as he stood up, glaring at Shanks. "So what? I'll just make sure that I don't fall off the ship." He suddenly gained an excited grin on his face. "Also, I'm really good at fighting. I beat up several animals by myself when my grandpa left me alone in a forest." Here, he threw his right fist forward. "My punch is strong as a cannon." Shanks gained doubtful look on his face and rested his head on his right hand. He expected Luffy to brag about his strength, but he didn't expect Luffy to compare it to a cannon. "Maybe a pistol, but not a cannon." So with an uninterested tone, Shanks said, "A cannon? Really now? That's amazing." Luffy gained a tick mark above his eyebrow and his teeth turned razor sharp as yelled, "Stop mocking me, you jerk." Some of Shanks' men, which included Lucky Roo and Yasopp, came up to the pair, dancing in a line, and one of them said, "Aw, come on, Captain. What's the harm in bringing Luffy with us on one voyage?" The others put in their own comments, describing how amazing it was to be a pirate. Luffy gained an odd look on his face as he stared at them and got really excited at the thought of actually being able to go on an adventure as a pirate. Shanks gained a mischievous smirk on his face and said, "Alright, but then one of you has to stay behind." This immediately made the group leave and say things like, "Well, back to partying." Luffy yelled out, "Traitors." And Shanks turned around to stare down at Luffy, pointing the spoon he had in his left hand as he ate, with smile on his face. "You're still a kid, Luffy. Maybe when you're a little older, I might take you." Luffy grit his teeth and yelled out, "I'm not a kid, you stupid ugly jerk." Shanks waved his right hand and said, "Calm down, Luffy." Shanks grabbed a glass full of orange juice and put it on the counter by his seat. "Here, have some juice." Luffy lost his angry look and gained a grateful look on his face as he rushed to the seat and grabbed the glass. "Thanks." Once he started drinking it, he heard laughter and turned to Shanks, who was laughing so hard that he was crying. "Ha! It's hilarious to see how much of a kid you are." Luffy got pissed off and walked away from Shanks. "Ugh, I'm so tired of Shanks making fun of me. Don't let the captain's words get to you, Luffy." Luffy made a huss sound and turned to the voice who was speaking to him and saw a man smoking. The man had jet black hair that was pulled back into a ponytail and a cigar between his lips. He was wearing a black V-neck shirt, green pants with a long yellow sash, and a pair of black boots. By his chair was a normal-looking rifle. This was Ben Beckman, vice captain of the red-haired pirates. "Vice captain. then motioned for Luffy to come closer, and when he did come closer, he explained to him that Shanks was a captain, despite his appearance, and he just wanted Luffy to know how risky it is. Luffy didn't believe him and stated that Shanks was just having fun teasing him, which was proven correct when Shanks made the comment of him being an anchor, making Ben's sweat drop. Suddenly, Makino came into the bar with a big barrel of sake and walked behind the counter. "It seems you're having a blast, Captain." Shanks grinned at her and said, "Teasing Luffy is how I have fun." Makino giggled and looked at Luffy, who was staring back at her. "Luffy, do you want to eat?" Luffy's eyes sparkled and he nodded his head as he quickly got back on the stool by Shanks. As he was eating, Luffy started to talk to Shanks about how long he was going to stay, and Shanks told him that he would leave after 2 or 3 more trips since they've been docked for a year. Luffy's attention was pulled away from Shanks, who decided to talk to Makino, to the chest that was by him. Opening it up, he saw a strange-looking fruit. It was a large and round light purple fruit made up of many small upside-down teardrop-shaped things with swirl patterns and green leaves sprouting from the top. It reminded Luffy of a pineapple, so his mouth watered as he thought. Desert. Luffy grabbed a fruit and took a huge bite out of it. He didn't expect it to taste so horrible and was ready to throw it up, but he was taught never to waste food, so he endured it and finished the rest. When he finished, he stuck out his tongue and gained a disgusted look on his face. Bleh. That was horrible. Why was this even here? That was so gross. He shook his head and decided to forget about it since he already finished it. The bar suddenly went quiet when the bar's doors were kicked up, with one of the doors landing on the floor, and a bunch of bandits walked in with the leader, Haguma, staring at Shanks' crew. Haguma then walked up to the counter and asked for sake, but Makino said that they didn't have any more left, pissing him off. Shanks tried to placate him by offering 1 bottle, but Haguma just responded by breaking the bottle, spilling the contents all over Shanks, bragging that he had a bounty, and mocked Shanks before leaving. When they left, Shanks and his crew just burst out laughing, while Makino went to Shanks to ask if he was okay. Luffy, not being old enough to understand the situation, got mad and shouted, "Why are you all laughing?" Everyone turned to him and he continued, "That was embarrassing. I thought you were a pirate. Why didn't you fight back?" Shanks grabbed his hat from his head with his right hand and shook it a bit to get rid of most of the sake before putting it back on his head. "Luffy, it's not worth fighting over some spilled sake." Luffy grit his teeth before he scoffed as he walked towards the exit. "Forget you guys. I'm not a weakling like you guys." Shanks decided to explain it to Luffy in greater detail and went to grab Luffy's left arm with his left hand. "Wait, Luffy." He didn't finish his sentence because as soon as he grabbed his arm, his hand went through him and Luffy's arm turned into black smoke. Everyone in the bar freaked out as Luffy wondered why they were. Looking behind him, his eyes grew large as he saw his hand was still in the form of black smoke. Lucky-Roo quickly rushed to the chest that was on the counter and saw that it was empty. He turned around to stare at Luffy with a picture of the exact fruit that Luffy ate not too long ago in his left hand. "Luffy, did you eat this fruit?" Luffy, after his hand reformed back into a normal hand, turned to Lucky-Roo and nodded nervously. Shanks' jaw dropped and he got in Luffy's face. "You idiot. You just ate the yummy no me. It turns your whole body into darkness and you won't be able to swim ever again." Luffy realized how serious the situation was and he yelled out, "Hey, you idiot." A week later, Luffy was sitting in a stool as he rested his head on the counter and messed around with a glass with his mouth. Makino, who was behind the counter cleaning a glass with a cloth, decided to make a conversation. "They sure have been gone for a while. Don't you miss them?" Luffy frowned and turned his head to the side. "No way. I'm still mad at Shanks for not fighting those bandits. I overestimated them." Makino just giggled at his childish antics and continued to clean the glass in her hand. Luffy sat up and put a piece of ice in his mouth from the cup as he looked down at his hands. Concentrating, Luffy watched as his hands transformed into the same black smoke from last week, but this time you could see a rough outline of a hand, which made him slightly grin. For the week that Shanks and his crew been gone, Luffy continued with his training that he didn't reveal yet to them and included mastering his powers to his training regime. After he got over the fact of not being able to swim anymore, he was still amazed at the powers he got from the fruit and experimented with them after he finished training his observation and armament Haki. He learned that he could control all things that involve darkness like shadows, where he could travel through them, and he noticed how the darkness seemed to have a pulling effect on things and wondered what would happen if something was absorbed into the darkness. He tried this on a rock with his left hand, and when he saw that the rock was successfully absorbed into the darkness in his left hand, Luffy cheered, but wondered where it was. So he attempted to do the opposite of what he first did, and this resulted in the rock, which he absorbed from before, to launch out of his left palm. Although, the rock came out of the darkness in several pieces. Luffy was really excited at the capabilities of his powers and wondered how strong he would be with them. He was brought out of his thoughts when Haguma and the other bandits came into the bar and started asking for some sake. Makino was quick to get him and the other bandit sake. The Guma then started to make fun of Shanks and his crew out loud as the others added their own input. Even though he was still mad at Shanks, Luffy still respected him as his idol, so he got really mad at their words. Luffy grit his teeth and after hearing another insult, decided he had enough. He got up from his seat and yelled, "Stop making fun of Shanks and the others. They aren't cowards at all." Makino tried to tell him to stop, but Luffy wasn't finished yet. "Let's go. I'll beat you guys all by myself." The Guma looked at Luffy in amusement and said, "Oh? So you want to fight? Alright, I'll humor you. Meet me outside." Guma and the rest of the bandits left the bar, snickering at Luffy. Luffy started to walk towards the exit, but Makino stopped him. "Luffy, apologize to them. I know they're jerks, but I don't want to see you get hurt." Luffy turned to her and saw the worried look in her eyes, so he gave her a grin. "Don't worry, Makino. I'm not going to get hurt. I'm stronger than you think." After he said those words, Luffy walked away with narrowed eyes. Makino, worried for Luffy's health, went to go get the mayor for some help. Outside Party's bar, Luffy stood across from Higuma and the other bandits as he crossed his arms and glared at them. "This is your last chance. Take back your words and you won't have to get hurt." Higuma smirked as he heard his men laugh and walked up to Luffy. Once he was standing in front of him, Higuma bent down and stared Luffy right in the eyes. "No." Luffy's eyes narrowed even more, and he whispered so only Higuma could hear him. "I warned you." Suddenly, Higuma felt his face cave in, and his eyes widened as he registered the pain on his face before he was sent flying past his men. He got up from the ground and stared in disbelief along with his men at Luffy, who had his right fist held out. Luffy let his arm drop and crossed his arms as he stared at them with bored yet angry eyes. The Guma immediately got angry and yelled out, "Kill this brat." His men broke out of their shock and roared as they charged Luffy with their swords raised to the sky. Luffy watched them run to him and, despite being outnumbered, felt no fear. Too slow. His form disappeared from their eyes and reappeared in front of Higuma, making him jump back in fright. When Higuma looked past Luffy, his eyes widened when he saw all his men fall to the floor. He stared back at Luffy with fear in his eyes as Luffy stared down at him. "I warned you." When he brought his right arm back to punch him in the face, Higuma, in an act to protect himself, drew his sword and slashed Luffy across the chest. He grinned when he saw it successfully go through him, but paled when he didn't see blood. Luffy looked down at his stomach for a second before looking at Higuma. That tickled. Higuma started to sweat and when Luffy cracks his knuckles, he let out a terrified scream. A couple of minutes later, Makino and the mayor appeared along with Shanks and his crew, expecting Luffy to be in some trouble, but what they saw shocked them. Luffy was seen sitting on a pile of bandit with Higuma's bruised form in the front of the pile, as he calmly whistled. Luffy stopped whistling when he sensed and saw them and jumped out of the pile to greet them. "Hey Shanks, I didn't know you got back. Look, I told you I was strong." Luffy then started to laugh as everyone stared at Luffy in disbelief. After tying up the bandits and scolding Luffy, Shanks congratulated Luffy on his victory. Luffy, of course, responded by giving his signature laugh. Luffy, though, gained a sad smile as he said, "I'm guessing you're leaving now, right?" Shanks nodded his head and said, "Yeah, we've been docked here for too long. It's time for us to go." Shanks then remembered what Luffy wanted and said, "Luffy, do you still want to go with me? I can see how strong you are and I won't mind taking you along." They, along with Makino and the mayor, were surprised though when Luffy shook his head no and grinned up at him. "No thanks. I decided to become my pirate on my own." Here Luffy gained an excited look, "and I'll have a crew that'll be stronger than yours. Then, I'll find the greatest treasure and become," Luffy threw his arms up, "Pirate King." Shanks' eyes widened for a second when he saw an outline of his old captain stand behind Luffy before he gained a small smile. "So you're going to be Pirate King, huh?" He crouched down and grabbed his hat with his right hand before putting it on top of Luffy's head. "Then, I'll leave this hat with you. Give it back to me when you become a great pirate, Luffy." Luffy was stunned for a couple seconds because Shanks wouldn't let anyone touch his hat. When he broke out of his shock, he started to cry heavily, but he managed to nod. Shanks' smile grew and he stood up before walking to his ship to catch up with the rest of his crew. Luffy with Makino and the mayor watched as they rowed away on their ship, with Shanks giving one final wave. Luffy rubbed his eyes before his eyes showed determination burning in his eyes. "I promise, Shanks. I will get stronger and I will become the Pirate King. Are you sure you're okay with this old dinghy? I could give you a bigger ship if you want." A rather average 30-year-old man with brown hair stared in disbelief at the man standing on said dinghy, along with a green-haired woman and an old man behind the man. The man they were staring at let out a deep masculine chuckle as the man grinned at them. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm pretty sure I'll be okay using this dinghy." The man let out a sigh before he walked away, waving. "Well, alright then, but don't blame me if you get caught in a whirlpool, Luffy." The man, now revealed as Luffy, just chuckled again, watching the man leave. "I'll be fine. Thanks again, Genki." Luffy, after the man left, jumped from the dinghy back onto the land and grabbed a barrel, which was filled with apples, that was next to the green-haired woman and the old man, before putting it on the dinghy. The green-haired woman tapped Luffy on his right shoulder, causing him to look at her. "Are you really okay with just this, Luffy?" Luffy turned around and put his hands behind his head, with a grin on his face. "Like I told Genki, I'll be fine, Makino." Makino sighed before giving Luffy a small smile as she stared up at him, thinking about how big he's gotten. After 10 years have passed, Luffy changed from the small slightly muscular 7-year-old boy to a tall, 6'0" handsome young man with broad shoulders and a muscular slightly lean body that made girls his age and even some older women blush. He still had shaggy black hair that was slightly longer and his scar under his left eye that he got when he tried to prove himself to Shanks. He wore a regular pair of sandals, black jeans, a tight red shirt with a black cloak similar to Shanks over his shoulders, and, of course, his straw hat entrusted to him by Shanks. She still couldn't believe that this was the same boy she raised as a child, as if he was her own, and was proud of the man he grew up to become. Makino walked up to Luffy and surprised him by giving the boy a hug. "Alright, but I want you to be careful, Luffy. Just because you are strong doesn't mean you can't be hurt. Do you understand?" Luffy blinked as he stared down at her before he smiled softly and reciprocated the hug. "I understand, Makino, and I promise I'll be safe." Makino released the hug and nodded her head with a satisfied look on her face. "Good." Luffy just grinned at her before turning to the old man, who approached him with a disappointed look on his face, but if you looked closely, you would see pride in his eyes. "I can't believe you're leaving to be pirate. Ah, you'll ruin the reputation of this town if you ever become a famous pirate." Luffy knew the old man didn't really mean what he said and knew that he was proud of him. "Well, Mayor Whoop Slap, if I become the Pirate King, then no one will want to mess with Fush Village." The mayor let a smirk appear on his face before he relaxed with a fake scowl as he scoffed, turning his head to the side. "Ah, hurry up and get out of here, you brat. The faster you leave, the better." Luffy just chuckled and jumped on the dinghy. "I'll miss you too, Mayor." Luffy turned around as he stared at the vast sea in front of him and thought about what happened in the last 10 years. After Shanks gave him his straw hat and left the village, Luffy kept up with his promise by waking up early the next day and training and mastering his abilities, both Haki and Devil Fruit powers. He also began to study as well with help from Makino and the mayor, who both provided him with books, so he knew the basics of navigation when he set out to sea. He continued with his schedule for a week before Garp came to the village when he heard Shanks was on the island. After discovering Luffy had talked with pirates and even said he would become a pirate himself, Garp got really pissed off and chased Luffy around the whole village, where he eventually was able to catch him, but that didn't last long, as his grip slipped right through Luffy's body in black smoke. When he discovered that Luffy gained a devil fruit power, which was from Shanks no less, words couldn't even begin to describe how angry Garp was. Well, in the end of that day, Luffy was covered in so much bruises that he just looked like one big bruise, which was due to Garp using armament Haki to actually do harm to him. The following day, Luffy was taken by Garp to Mount Kalubo, where it was revealed that there was a small building near the top of the mountain. When Garp yelled out for the occupants of the building to come out, the people revealed to live in the building were mountain bandits, with the leader being an orange curly long-haired woman named Dayton. After explaining the situation to her and how she had to take care of Luffy, Dayton, unpredictably, said no, but that soon changed when Garp threatened to send her to jail. While that happened, Luffy, who was dropped by Garp when they arrived to the building, looked around until his observation Haki told him of a strong presence nearby. Looking towards the area where the presence was coming from, Luffy was surprised, while at the same time, not surprised that the strong presence was from a boy who looked 3 years older than him, with shaggy black hair like him, but this boy had freckles. Garp, after hitting Dayton in the head for disagreeing the first time, turned around and saw that Luffy had met Ace, who he introduced to Luffy when he asked. Luffy, being the ever-energetic boy he was, excitedly told him his name and asked if they could be friends. Ace responded by spitting in Luffy's face, but Luffy easily dodged it with a frown, surprising Ace slightly that he was able to dodge from such a close range. Ace ran away after that, causing Luffy to chase after him. Garp smirked seeing Luffy chase after Ace and had a feeling they would get along, so he left. Luffy kept chasing after Ace every single day after that, and Ace would always try to stop him by putting obstacles in his path. Luffy could have dodged all these attempts, but he decided to fall for them on purpose and keep chasing after him, in hopes of showing Ace that he wasn't weak and would accept him. When Ace ran out of obstacles to block his path, which took 3 months, Luffy discovered the Great Terminal. Luffy looked for Ace and found him robbing 2 people of their loot. He then decides to sneakingly follow Ace to the forest, where he found that Ace had a secret stash and a blonde friend named Sabo. The two panicked when they noticed him and tied him up as a result, away from their secret stash. Even though Luffy could break out of the ropes easily, thanks to training every single day before chasing after Ace, Luffy acted as a weak 7-year-old. The two talked about how they had to kill him, which Luffy found hilarious because they looked scared to kill him, so he was confident that they wouldn't do it. All three of them heard someone talking, and Ace and Sabo ran away, leaving Luffy behind. The person they heard speaking was a guy named Porkamy, who questioned Luffy about Ace and Sabo. Not wanting his friends to be hurt, Luffy said he would never tell, causing the man to take him to his base. Luffy later found himself tied up similar to a punching bag, and Porkamy said he would punch him with his spiked gloves if he didn't tell him the location of Ace and Sabo's stash. Of course, Luffy stayed silent, which in turn made Porkamy punch him as a result. Luffy barely felt the punch and let the punch hit him by raining his darkness fruit powers in, cause he didn't want to reveal that he had a devial fruit power yet. After countless hours of being used as a punching bag, Luffy was starting to get bored as Porkamy panted in exhaustion. Just as he contemplated breaking free, one of the walls was busted in by Ace and Sabo, who untied Luffy. All three together easily beat Porkamy and his goons and ran for the forest. Luffy explained how he never told them anything and that he just wanted to be Ace's friend, which made Ace respect him along with Sabo. On that day, all three became great friends and after a couple weeks, became brothers by drinking sake together. The months that followed that were some of the best times in Luffy's life as he hunted, trained, and bonded with his brothers. He was even able to teach Ace and Sabo armament Haki with some observation Haki, tough it wasn't on the same level as him. Although, those good times didn't last as Sabo's father took Sabo back by force, causing Luffy and Ace to be enraged. They did all they could to help, but in the end, Sabo ended up getting killed when his ship that he took was blasted by a Tenryubito, with Luffy unable to send Sabo, because his observation Haki couldn't reach that far. Luffy and Ace that day gained a deep hatred for Tenryubito. Ace promised to Luffy that he wouldn't die, and the two brothers spent years training until Ace turned 17 and left on his own journey. After Ace left the island, Luffy felt great regret for not informing his brothers of his devil fruit abilities and thought that if he did, then Sabo could have been saved. The only way, in his mind, that he could redeem himself was to train even harder than before. Train so hard that by the end of the day, he would be wishing he died. Train so hard that his enemies would barely be able to scratch him. Train so hard that no one close to him would ever die again. Thanks to that motivation, Luffy's gotten to a level that would make vice admirals jealous in only 3 years. His observation Haki was at such high level that he could sense everyone on the island and differentiate each signature. He could also predict all attacks sent his way. In other words, he would be untouchable to those who didn't have the speed to hit him. His armament Haki was considered mastered as he could now cover his entire body in Haki, along with any weapon in his hands. The strength of his attacks were so enhanced by his Haki that he could obliterate a large-sized boulder with one punch, and the repelling effect of his Haki would cause enemies to think twice before attacking him. Luffy also discovered that, like Ace, he had the Conqueror's Haki, which would cause a person whose will was weaker than his to fall unconscious. He didn't have great control of it because he only discovered a year ago, but he could control the range of his Conqueror's Haki, so it wasn't all that bad. His abilities with his darkness fruit also increased as he learned he could store items into a place he liked to call the Void for storing and also created a similar technique, but this one destroyed everything that was absorbed, which he dubbed as Black Hole. That wasn't all as he could also control the gravity in dark areas in any way he wanted, such as pulling an enemy towards him or pushing them away. Luffy shook his head as he cleared his thoughts and brought his right hand up. Looking down at it, Luffy closed it into a fist and stared out into the ocean. It's finally my time for me to go out into the world and make a name for myself. Watch out, Ace. I'll catch up to you and pass you as I become king of the pirates. Luffy nodded and untied his dinghy from the port, causing his dinghy to slowly be pushed by the waves. Luffy turned around and waved with his left hand and grinned. I'll be back, Makino, Mayor, when I become the Pirate King. His grin grew when he saw them wave back and felt a familiar presence approach him underwater. He turned back around and looked up, slightly confusing Makino and the mayor, until they saw something big come out of the water. When they saw a Sea King serpent, they felt terrified for Luffy, but were shocked by his next action. Luffy yelled up at the beast. "Hey Mizuchi." The Sea King poked down at Luffy with narrowed eyes, before gaining a happy look on his face as he bent his head down. Luffy pet the serpent with his right hand as he stared into his eyes. "It's been 3 years since we met, Mizuchi, and in those 3 years, you've gotten stronger than I expected. I trust you will protect the village if it's ever attacked, won't you?" Mizuchi nodded his head, wanting to please his friend who made him stronger than any Sea King that lived nearby. Luffy nodded, satisfied with his answer. "But boy. Now, it's time for me to go, so I'll see you when I come back." Mizuchi gained a sad look, but nodded as he descended back into the ocean. Luffy turned his attention back to where Makino and the mayor were standing and saw that they fainted. He chuckled and just decided that enough words were said, so he continued heading to his first destination. Shell's Town. Unknown ship. A pink-haired boy with glasses, who was wearing a blue and white striped shirt and beige shorts. How could this happen to me? All I wanted to do was go fishing, and I ended up being a cabin boy for ugly, terrifying pirate, forced to do whatever they tell me to do. He saw a door near the end of the hall and nervously approached it. Well, I can't do anything about it now. I have to find something that is valuable or else Alvida will kill me. The boy slowly peeked through the door, and when he saw no one inside, he sighed in relief. At least no one's here. He, of course, wasn't that surprised to find the room empty, considering that Alvida is raiding the ship of all its goods. The boy walked into the room and looked all around him, noticing that it was a kitchen. This is the kitchen, so maybe I can find some wine or something for Alvida. He nodded to himself as he came up to a decision and walked around the kitchen until his eyes landed on a large barrel. He walked to it and tried pushing it with all his strength, but it wouldn't budge at all. The boy backed up as he started panting from trying to push the barrel. This barrel is so hard to move. That must mean it's filled to the brim with wine, right? Before he could ponder about it some more, 3 tough-looking guys wearing bandanas walked in. The boy let out a shriek of fright, causing said men to look in his direction with dark grins and curiosity in their eyes. The obese one of the 3 men approached the boy with the other 2 following behind. "What you got there, Koby?" The boy, now identified as Koby, shook nervously as he stared up into the man's eyes. I just found some wine for Alvida-sama." The men quirked their eyebrow in interest and amusement as the obese man pushed Koby aside, causing the pink-haired boy to fall to the ground. "Well then, why don't we just have quick taste?" Koby quickly shot up and looked up at the man with panicked eyes. "BB, but you can't. TT, that's for Alvida-sama." The obese man glared down at him in annoyance as the 2 men behind him chuckled in amusement. "What, she doesn't want hurt her? As long as you don't tell her anything." "Alright." Koby shook where he stood but said no further complaints. The obese man turned his head behind him to look at the other 2 as he chuckled. "This kid's a riot, don't you think?" The taller blonde man laughed at his words. "Yeah, he is. It's always fun seeing this kid squirm." The other man, who was wearing a red bandana, gained an impatient look. "Alright, I know it's fun messing with him, but can you open the barrel already? I'm thirsty for some wine over here." The obese man just waved his left hand in the air as he turned his attention back to the barrel. Alright. Just be patient." The man held up his right arm with his hand closed in a fist and a smirk on his face. "I'll break open this barrel with one punch." The 2 men cheered as he pulled his arm back, while Koby could only watch. Before he could break open the barrel burst into a million pieces as a huge figure appeared standing in the same place the barrel previously was. This action made the obese man fall on his ass with the 2 men behind him backing up as they all stared in disbelief at the man, who was currently scratching the back of his head with his left hand and yawned. Koby's eyes widened and his jaw dropped. Why was that guy inside that barrel? The man stopped scratching his head and before looking at Koby then the men. His eyes were bored as he asked, "Who are you guys?" All 3 men stood together and gained shark-like teeth as they yelled, "Who the hell are you?" The man just grinned before placing the straw hat around his neck on his head. "I'm Monkey D. Luffy. Nice to meet you." The men stared at him incredulously before they all grinned darkly as they pulled out swords from the side of their waists. "Well, Monkey Man, I'm sorry to say, but we're going to have to kill you for making us look like fools." Luffy let out a sound while Koby watched fearfully for Luffy's life. "That guy's going to die." The men brought their arms up with the swords in their hand as they yelled, "Die." Koby shut his eyes not wanting to see a person get murdered. Luffy stared at the descending blades with bored eyes before grabbing all 3 of them with his left hand easily. Even without Haki, Luffy's training he did and received from Garp made his body naturally stronger than average, so he wouldn't even get cut from a regular blade. Luffy gripped the swords in his hand tighter, causing them to shatter, and for the men to back up fearfully with wide eyes. The men just realized how intimidating Luffy was when they finally noticed he was taller and looked bigger than all of them. Luffy lifted his arms, cracking his right fist with his left hand as he stared down at them. "Who did you say you were going to kill?" As soon as he finished saying those words, the men dropped the broken swords and ran out of the room to inform Alvida of the monster. Luffy dropped his arms and put his hands into his pockets, laughing. That was fun. Koby, still hearing the man alive, opened his eyes and was confused when he saw the men gone. He nervously stared at Luffy, who just noticed that he was still in the same spot. What happened? Luffy grinned as he took out his right hand from his pocket to point behind him. They ran away. Koby was shocked to hear that and noticed that on the floor were some broken swords. Did this guy do that? How can someone be this powerful? Koby blinked when he saw a hand waving in his face, which made him back up and look up at Luffy nervously. Why yes. Luffy put his right hand, which he used to get Koby's attention, on his stomach with a sheepish grin on his face. Do you have some food I can eat? On the deck of the ship, Alvida-sama. A fat, ugly woman with freckles narrowed her eyes as she turned around to stare at three men running to her with wide eyes. Didn't feel like describing what she wore, but pretty much rewatch the first episode if you want to know. What is it? The obese man at front bent over taking a couple of breaths due to exhaustion, followed by the two other men following him. When he got his breath back, the man stared up at Alvida, motioning below with his right hand. TT, there's a monster down there. It's this guy who was able to break our swords easily with only one hand. I don't know how he did it, but he's crazy strong, boss. Alvida quirked an eyebrow in interest as she thought about his words. The man with incredible strength, huh? Is it that famous bounty hunter with 3 swords or is it someone else? But Luffy and Koby. Koby watched in awe as he watched Luffy, who was crouched down in front of a pile of apples, eat several apples without pause. Where does it all go? Luffy, who heard his comment, smirked to himself as he found it amusing how his appetite amazes people. After a couple minutes of eating, Luffy sighed in satisfaction while leaning back, patting his stomach with his left hand. That was good. Koby just shook his head in disbelief. I can't believe you were able to eat all those apples by yourself. Luffy looked at him and chuckled before he started to wonder about where he was. So where am I and what's going on? I can feel some people above and several other people getting farther from this place. Koby stared at him confused when he said felt, no knowing about observation Haki, and decided to ignore it and tell Luffy what was going on. Well, right now we're on some random ship that my captain wanted to raid, so I suggest that you get away from here while you can. I think there's a lifeboat still around for you to escape. Luffy quirked an eyebrow when he heard the venomous tone when he mentioned his captain. Do you have something against your captain or something? Koby blinked at the question, not expecting it, before he narrowed his eyes as he clenched his fists and grit his teeth in anger, slightly surprising Luffy. My captain is a woman named Alvida and was forced to be her cabin boy, slave being a better word, for 2 years after I got on her ship by accident, thinking it was a fishing boat. Luffy stared at him with disbelief in his eyes at his stupidity, but decided to ask him another question. If you hated it so much, why didn't you leave? Koby looked at him like he was an idiot before shaking his head so fast that one would expect it to come off any second. Impossible. Impossible. There's no way for a weak person like me to run away from someone so strong like Alvida. There was a deafening silence as Luffy stared at him for a while before said straw hat wearing man burst out laughing, holding his stomach with his hands, rolling on the floor. Ha 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 ha. I can't believe how stupid you are. Koby watched him laugh at his expense for a while with an embarrassed blush before getting angry and gaining shark-like teeth. Why the hell are you laughing? Luffy didn't stop laughing, though, but it eased into a chuckle before ending with a smile on his face as he wiped an imaginary tear from his eye with his left index finger. Thanks, Koby. It's been a long time since I laughed that hard. As for the reason for laughing so hard. Simple, why didn't you just train and kick her ass in those 2 years? Koby stepped back as if he was shot by a bullet before shaking his head back and forth again. Impossible. Impossible. There's no way. Koby couldn't finish his sentence as he was hit in the back of the head by Luffy with his left fist. Tai. Koby grabbed the bump that formed on his head with both his hands and stared up at Luffy, who had a frown on his face, with tears in his eyes. Why did you hit me? Luffy crossed his arms in front of his chest. You repeating impossible over and over again was really getting annoying. I don't believe in the idea of impossible as anything is possible if you try hard enough. Koby gained an awe look in his eyes. Do you really believe that? Luffy grinned and nodded his head. Of course. I'm going to be the man that becomes the second Pirate King after all. Koby's jaw dropped and his eyes widened. Pirate King, don't you have to be really, really strong, like Yonko level strong, to be the Pirate King? Koby didn't think it was possible, but it seemed to him that the grin on Luffy's face grew bigger. Yep. Before Koby could go on his usual impossible speech, Luffy narrowed his eyes, showing nothing but seriousness, causing the pink-haired boy to gulp nervously. It may seem impossible to several people, but like I said before, Koby, anything is possible as long as you try. Besides, I have been training ever since I was 5 years old, so I'm confident that I can accomplish my dream. Koby, once he heard the words my dream, felt a metaphorical light switch flick on in his brain. My dream? Is it really possible too? I mean, he did say that as long as you try, you can do anything, right? Luffy, seeing the thoughtful look on Koby's face, smiled softly. I told you my dream, Koby. Now, what is your dream? Koby was nervous because he felt if he told Luffy his dream, then Luffy would just laugh at him or worse, get angry with him, but that thought went away when he saw plain old curiosity in the man's eyes. He gained a determined look and said, my dream is to become a great marine. A marine who upholds the justice for the people and protects people from evil pirates like Alvida. He was surprised when Luffy just chuckled, instead of outright getting angry or laughing. It's nice to hear you finally sounding so confident about something. I swear, if I heard you go on about impossibilities, I would have socked you in the face. Koby was terrified to hear the last part, but was overall happy to have finally said his dream without being mocked, and even praised a little. He scratched the back of his head with his left hand with a bashful blush on his face. "Thanks a lot, Luffy." Luffy grinned and gave a thumbs up with his right hand. "Glad to help." Luffy dropped his arms and gained a feral grin on his face. "Now, why don't we beat this Alvida and get you to become a marine, eh?" Koby, for once in his life, grinned with confidence up at Luffy. "Yes, with Alvida." Alvida, after being told by his men about the man inside the ship, decided to wait for the man himself to come to her as she rested her iron-spiked club over her right shoulder. When nothing happened for a couple of minutes, Alvida was slowly losing her patience as she gained tick marks above her eyebrow, which increased in number for every minute that passed. After the 10-minute, she gained a scowl on his have and snarled at the three men, who were shaking where they stood, to her left as her other men that were behind her watched this transpire. "You three fools will pay for wasting my time." She approached the three and for every step she took, the three men took 2 steps back, but were forced into a wall. The three men, seeing that they had no way to escape from Hereath, got down on their knees and begged for forgiveness as she slowly lifted her club above her head. Just before she could bring it down on their heads, most likely killing them from the impact, the door the three men came running from opened with such great force that it was sent flying away from the ship at speeds that would make a cannonball jealous. Alvida along with her men stared in disbelief at the leg that was sticking out of the frame of the door sent flying. They all watched, nervously and fearfully, as the leg slowly dropped, and when it revealed Luffy with Koby standing behind him, Alvida narrowed her eyes in anger as she put the club back on her shoulder, making the three men from before run to Alvida's other men, glaring at the Koby, who flinched. "What is the meaning of this, Koby?" Koby shook a little before Luffy patted him on his right shoulder comfortingly with his left hand. He stood up straighter, shocking Alvida and her men slightly. "I'm going to kick your ass and become a marine to capture pirates like you fat old hag." Alvida's men gasped in shock and fear before looking apprehensively at Alvida. Alvida, herself, shook in anger, staring at the floor, covering her eyes in shadows. "How dare this brat call me a fat old hag? He thinks, just because he gained some muscle, that he could now retaliate against me. I'll show him how wrong he is." Alvida looked up and glared at Koby with so much hate and anger before running towards him, raising his club over her head. "Koby, prepare to die." Koby didn't shriek or even back away as he stood in the same spot, but with some tears in his eyes. "I said it. I can't believe I was able to say it. Even though I'll just end up dying, I'm glad I was able to say what I wanted." He seemed to temporarily forget about his straw hat friend, who watched in amusement at Alvida running towards them. Alvida brought down her club towards Koby with a dark smirk on her face, but her club was stopped by Luffy, who just held it back with his left index finger as he had his right hand in his pants pocket. Luffy grinned at Alvida's shocked face and turned his head behind slightly to look at Koby, who just remembered he was there. "Well said, Koby. Now that I see you have the resolve to face your enemies head-on without backing away, I'll handle the rest." Luffy used a small percentage of his strength to push Alvida's club back to her. What Luffy didn't realize, since he was so used to fighting strong enemies, a small percent of his strength was equal to the strength of an average-sized gorilla. This resulted in Alvida, who held a firm grip on her club, to be launched into her men, causing a domino effect as each man fell on another man. Luffy blinked, looked at his finger, then turned to Koby, who couldn't believe that someone could send Alvida flying like that, with a sheepish grin. "Whoops. Guess I still have to learn how to control my strength, or else I might end up killing someone with just a handshake or something." Alvida got up and never felt so angry in her entire life. Turning around, she saw that her men got up a second after she did and yelled out to them, "Kill them." The men roared as they all took out their own swords, running to Luffy. Luffy turned his attention back to the fight when he heard Alvida's men roar and used his observation Haki to count the amount of men rushing towards him. 57 men, huh? None of them are really strong, so it'll be easy to take them out with a Pulse of Conqueror's Haki, but that would be too boring. His face gained the appearance of a predator hunting its prey as he brought his arms up, cracking his right fist with his left hand. "Well, what better way to make a name for myself than kicking some ass the old-fashioned way?" Luffy walked calmly forward to meet the group of men head-on, giving Koby, who was still staring in awe from pushing Alvida away like she weighed nothing, some advice. "Don't blink, Koby, or you might just miss everything." Once the first man reached Luffy, everything was over before Alvida and Koby knew it. Luffy dodged the first man's attack by shifting his body to the left slightly and punched him in the gut with his right fist, making him bend over, but it didn't end there. When the man was bent over, Luffy brought his right knee up, causing the man to be lifted in the air slightly as he got hit on his chin, and, using his right arm again, punched him in face, sending the man flying, bringing 6 others with him as they all fell overboard. Directly after sending the first 7 men flying, Luffy then brought his left below back as fast as he could, connecting with a random guy's face, who thought attacking from behind could work, before twisting his body to the left, punching another man's face with his right fist, then brought his right elbow back hitting another man. He leaned back, dodging a sword swipe, and knocked the man, who attempted to cut him, out with a quick chop to the back of the neck with his left hand. Luffy beat the rest of Alvida's men in a similar manner, with some slight kicks and headbutts here and there, either knocking them out or launching them overboard. All of this happened within a minute or so. Alvida backed away with fearful eyes, staring at Luffy, who was calmly walking over to her. "Who are you?" Luffy stopped walking towards her, but as soon as Alvida blinked, Luffy was in her face, grinning like a devil, causing her to almost faint in shock at his speed. "I'm Monkey D. Luffy, the future Pirate King," and he leaned forward so that his lips was next to her left ear, terrifying her greatly. The embodiment of darkness. She barely let out a "huh" at the last part before her answered as Luffy's feet turned into a dark smoky-like substance that slowly spread over the whole deck. Luffy then whispered something that Alvida barely heard. "Black hole." Alvida could only watch in horror as the unconscious bodies of her men that were on the deck were sucked into the darkness. She now understood, at that moment, that she was dealing with someone way out of her league. Luffy backed up a bit before pointing his right hand in her direction. In the middle of his palm, a dark vortex appeared, making frightened Alvida wonder what was he going to do next. Liberation. As soon as he said those words, her men that were sucked into Luffy's black hole were sent flying towards her, knocking her out. Luffy dropped his arms and stared at their unconscious forms with an easygoing grin. He was so glad that he could control the gravity inside the black hole, or else he would have killed some people by accident. He turned his attention back to Koby, who seemed ready to faint at witnessing his abilities, and gave him a peace sign with his left hand. That was easy. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support the RyuUchihaSenju for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.